You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
Nathan.
Oh my God, Katie, it's time for another new season of Queen's Podcast. But before we do that, we always like to run a little bit of a spoiler week for you guys.
Yes.
So what do we have in store for them, Katie?
Welcome, everybody, to Queen's Podcast, Wars of the Roses Week.
Ooh. Everybody loves a good War of the Roses.
Yes, we will be rerunning all of our ladies from that time that we've covered on the podcast so far, leading up to our season 8 premiere. Nathan, the suspense is killing me.
Is it really? I think you already know.
So enjoy, everybody, and get excited for season 8. Oh, and Nathan, do we curse on this show?
Ferk, yeah.
Ferk, yeah. So if you don't like cursing, this will not be the show for you.
Cheers, bitches.
Woo! Oh, good afternoon, Nathan.
Hello, Katie.
Nathan, I am so excited for today's episode.
I know, me too.
So, Nathan, who are we talking about?
Elizabeth of York.
Ooh, she was Queen of England as the first queen of the Tudor dynasty. In her lifetime, she was daughter, sister, niece, and then wife to the King of England. She's the daughter of Elizabeth Woodville and the mother of this dude named Henry VIII that...
Maybe you've heard of him.
All right, Nathan, tell us about this cocktail.
So, for today, I am making the Rose Hey Sangria.
Oh!
So, what you're going to do is you're going to take an orange, 2 cups of strawberries, and a half of a lemon. And you're going to chop those up and then put 2 tablespoons of sugar on that and let that sit for I let it sit for a good hour. That's called macerating. Ooh, on a good weekend, I like to macerate.
You got to macerate at least, a couple
Once
hours
a day.
each week. Yeah, absolutely.
And then after I'm done macerating, I pour a bottle of rosé in it and then top it. Yeah, it's just done. And then I put, I think it was a 24 ounce of club soda in that afterwards. And then you can put a third of a cup of brandy or a Grand Marnier. I did not do that in this recipe because we are recording and I like to make sure that we don't get too wasted because editing is a bitch.
Whenever you're drunk. Yes.
So that's the drink, the Rosé Hey Sangria.
Well, it is delicious and delightful.
So let's get to Elizabeth of York. She was born February 11th, 1466. So she's an Aquarius if you're keeping tabs on that. So that means she's progressive, original, independent, and a humanitarian, which I kind of think is pretty on brand with her.
Yeah.
They're also charming and a little impulsive. So
I agree that at least her public persona and what we see of her from her actions, I think all of that jives with Elizabeth's personality.
For sure.
Real briefly, if you haven't listened to our Elizabeth Woodville episode or Jacquetta of Luxembourg episode, that is her mother and grandmother. It might behoove you to go and listen to that as a bit for some bit of context. But if you don't feel like it, we'll try to clue you in. She was born into a time called the Wars of the Roses.
That is a 5-part episode if you really wanted to do it.
Oh my God. It is my favorite time period because it is the most soap opera of soap opera-y time periods. And I just love it.
There's the Plantagenets. Everybody's basically a Plantagenet. There's some fragile dick energy and some people get pissed off and break up into 2 different families. So you have the Yorks and the Lancasters. And the York's family symbol is the white rose, and the Lancaster symbol is the red rose, hence the War of the Roses.
Yes.
So they're both fighting for the throne, obviously.
And since she's Elizabeth York, you can guess which side she's on. She is
the Lancaster. Oh, shit,
Clearly.
I fucked it up.
Clearly, Elizabeth York, famous Lancastrian princess. So her dad is king at the time, and he's a Yorkist. So when she hits the scene, obviously the Yorks are winning the Wars of the Roses, and now you're kind of caught up.
Yeah, kind of. So she was the first child of King Edward IV and his queen Elizabeth of Woodville. So if you haven't listened to Elizabeth Woodville episode, this was a really controversial marriage. Like her mother was considered a commoner, and to marry a king, albeit in secret, made Elizabeth Woodville very controversial. And on top of that, she was a Lancastrian supporter, and she already had 2 kids. So it was like this whole fucking...
They wanted Edward to marry a virgin princess, and instead
she won no virgin.
He marries this commoner widow, and everyone's like, what are you doing?
They married for love.
Yeah.
And also they were both super sexy, and that's a reason enough to get married. Yes. And then right after they get married, bam, Lizzie is born. Like they wasted no fucking time.
Well, they didn't have contraceptive back then, so.
No, they didn't. And they were just too hot to handle and couldn't keep their hands off each other. She was born at Westminster Palace and christened at Westminster Abbey. So obviously her upbringing is bougie as fuck, y'all.
Edward IV, he was not a frugal guy. He wanted his court to be the fanciest in the world. He wanted his wife, his daughters, any women at his court to be dressed in the fanciest clothes. They had to have the fanciest food. They had to have the best art. And so they did. And
yeah, I think that was like Edward didn't want anyone to question that he was the king at that point, because he's so extravagant. He has all this wealth, so he's obviously the king. So I think that was his way of doing it.
I've got the biggest court. Well, a reason behind that. So he had overthrown his cousin. His cousin was Henry VI. Henry VI was very mentally ill. Very long story short, Edward comes in and takes over as king while Henry VI is still alive, like overthrows him. So there might be some people in the country still that are like, do you have the right to be king? And so basically he wanted to turn the fanciness up to 11, being like, I can't hear you. Look how beautiful my court is.
Look at my dress. Yes.
Absolutely. Look at the fanciness. Don't think about if I should actually be king or not.
Yeah. Again, this is like super oversimplification of this. So also her family, in terms of like royal families, her family is super tight knit. They're very, very close, especially in terms of royal families. They didn't really have the same upbringing as everybody else.
Elizabeth was still like sent to her own like properties to be raised, but still in the grand scheme of things, they were still a tight-knit family, all things considered.
Yes. So she was sent off to her own residence, and it was called the Sheen Palace, which is now called the Richmond Palace. And she was raised and educated there, but her parents were pretty involved in that education and her schooling. So she also had a sister that was only 16 months younger than her. So her sister's name was Mary, and she was sent to that same residence to be raised.
Not married off at age 7 and sent to a foreign land, like actually got to know her family. And I think this shows in her personality, because we'll see it some in this episode, and we'll see it in the second episode about her too. She is ride or die for her family, for her brothers and sisters and mom. It's very, very important to her.
So let's talk education. She had a pretty good education for a girl at the time. She would have learned a couple of languages. She probably was the best at Latin.
Yeah.
You know?
Everything I read about her education, it was just like she was so good at languages. Latin, Definitely French. Spanish.
So Elizabeth of York took Rosetta Stone. Yeah. Either way, she's like this absolutely perfect little princess.
Yes.
Very well-mannered, very, very pretty. So her parents obviously are like, look at my beautiful daughter.
Isn't she the perfect little accessory to our bougie court? Yeah.
Exactly. So every royal event, they brought her there. So she grew up very seen and adored by everyone. And she was just genuinely like a sweet person and just like the ideal princess should be.
Yeah, I agree. She was like, when you think Disney princess as a child, you're picturing Elizabeth of York just very sweet, pretty, well-mannered. She had like a million sisters.
Like the Woodvilles tend to do.
Oh my gosh. Those Woodvilles, babies on babies on babies on babies. And she also had 2 half-brothers, like we mentioned, when her mother married the king. She had 2 sons from a previous marriage. Altogether, she has 9 siblings. Most of them are sisters.
So just like every fucking royal family, the moment that you stroll out of the womb, sashay away, you get engaged. So, I mean, you're just basically a bargaining chip as a female. So this family has lots of bargaining chips.
Yes.
Her first betrothal was at age 3, count it, trois, to her cousin, George Neville, who was only 8.
At least she wasn't engaged to some guy that was already a grown-ass man. At least it was somebody that was kind of her age.
Katie always looking at the silver lining in life.
Right.
I mean, but yeah, it was basically just to keep the peace, you know, and I don't really think that they ever really wanted her to marry George Neville because there were plenty of other guys that were some good catches out there.
Right. The reason for this alliance, so again, this calls back to another episode where we go into it a little bit more in depth. Her dad's right-hand man was this dude named Richard Neville, aka the Earl of Warwick, aka War Dick, is what we call him.
I think War Dick is the most appropriate name for this asshole.
Yes. And he was like really mad at Edward for just like some fragile dick energy reasons.
It's the War of the Roses.
Everybody's mad at everybody. And Wardick is mad. And Wardick didn't have any sons. So this George Neville guy was his heir as his nephew. And so by Edward betrothing Elizabeth to George, Wardick's heir, it was like a saying like, look, no, don't have FOMO. Don't like, we're cool. I still consider you part of my inner circle. Yeah. If you don't know anything about Wars of the Roses, this episode might be a little bit confusing with stuff like that.
Yeah. Go back.
Elizabeth
Woodville and then
Jacquetta of Luxembourg.
So Lizzie had a lot of trauma in her early life. The first one we're going to get to now. So she's just shy of 4 years old and she's with her mother at, some royal event and the king wasn't there. Tension with Wardick at this point had been rising to a boiling point. And Edward was like, you know what? Just gonna hang back, put Wardick and his army in their place, and then I'll just come meet y'all up later, okay? Mm-hmm. But instead of Edward arriving, a messenger arrives that informs Mama Elizabeth that actually your husband Edward lost the battle and is being held prisoner, and Wardick had your dad and brother beheaded. So, congratulations.
They were beheaded. Her dad and her brother were beheaded with no trial, which even back in medieval times was super not cash money, Mm-hmm. And so Elizabeth Woodville loses her shit.
As one would.
It's befitting of a human with emotions. Yes. I don't know how close Lizzie would have been necessarily to her grandfather and uncle, but her mother was very, very much affected by this. So, I mean, even at a young age like that, seeing your mother go through that, And then hearing that your father, who like in her eyes at this time is like a Christ-like figure, lost a battle. I mean, she has to be affected.
We have no record of how she reacted because she was like a baby at this point, but we can assume that seeing her parents and her mother devastated and learning of all this, her little world shattered.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
So during this time of Edward's imprisonment, the queen and her daughters lay low, as they should. I mean, you really can't blame them for that.
Right. And Wardick gives orders. Leave Elizabeth Woodville, leave her children alone. They're just a woman and children. Like, don't assault them or anything. But this whole thing was very short-lived. And Edward is released about a month later because Wardick had no plan. It was like step 1, capture the king. Step 2, ...
Exactly. So eventually Edward comes back to court and Lizzie and the fam rush to meet him. And upon his arrival, he officially names his daughter, Lizzie, as his heir.
This is huge.
Yeah, like obviously plan A was to have a son or two, like the heir and the spare, but officially naming his daughter as his heir apparent wasn't actually a given.
No.
So, like at this point, his brother George was assumed to be the heir apparent. And to make Lizzie the heir apparent, that's a big fucking deal.
That's a really big deal to be like, it was like showing everybody, because, he had just been like kidnapped and blah, blah, blah. It was like showing everybody that, no, I'm putting my foot fucking down. This is my wife. She's my actual wife, and my kids by her are the like next in line.
Could you imagine if she was actually queen? I wish I could live in a world where she would have been like she would have been actually the heir apparent and she actually became queen. Would she be Queen Elizabeth? Would she be Queen Elizabeth I?
Yeah, she would have been Queen Elizabeth I.
So Queen Elizabeth II now would be Queen Elizabeth III? Yes. Yes. I can do math. I can count.
This also made her a BFD on the marriage market.
Yeah.
Because now, like, if the king died tomorrow and never had any sons, she's next in line, and whoever she marries is then king, because that's how things worked back then.
Yeah. So everything goes back to normal as far as Lizzie's concerned. Edward actually forgives Wardick, which is shows a lot about his character, because
right?
I may have killed the dude.
Especially if he beheaded your father-in-law.
I think this is where like Lizzie learns how important it is to like keep the peace.
Don't let your personal emotions get in the way of what's good for the country.
Exactly. And things would never go back to normal, but sweet baby Lizzie, she has her family back, and her dad loves her so much, and he's named her heir. So this is all just like perfectly. I wish we could just end the episode here.
And that's it. And she lived happily.
Goodbye, guys.
After. No more trauma. Bye. But sadly, the next year, the shit hits the rose-colored fan.
Rose hit my shit. Keep me from the trouble and pain.
No, Rocky. No, sadly.
Damn it. I tried.
It is this whole thing, which we're going to skim over again, because otherwise it would be like a 6-part episode on the Wars of the Roses. But basically what you need to know is Wardick is back. And this time he has a plan. It's just not like kidnap king, ...
It's kidnap king, ... overthrow king.
Overthrow king, put new king in place, marry daughter to new king. Like he had an actual like business model. It's September 1470. Lizzie is 4.
She's still like a baby.
So much trauma in her very young life that I hope she just didn't remember. Warwick moves in, and he's got some powerful allies this time. Goes to his family again and is like, look, guys, it's no big deal, but y'all should probably go to the Tower of London for protection while I handle this situation. So the very pregnant Elizabeth Woodville, 7 months pregnant.
Besides being super pregnant, Elizabeth Woodville doing this, how scary this might have been for someone like little Lizzie, who's only like 4 fucking years
She's
old.
4. So also, Elizabeth Woodville is 7 months pregnant, and with her, she's got her 3 daughters, the oldest, which is 4. So she's got like a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old running and taking shelter. And so I just imagine, like, what do you do in that scenario as Elizabeth Woodville? You're just telling your kids, like, look, it's fine. Daddy's going to be right back. Daddy's got this handled. Your dad's the king. He's going to take care of this. Chill, 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 my babies.
Yeah. Well, a few days later, little Lizzie is like woken up in the middle of the night and finds out that Edward has lost the battle and has just run out of the country. And so you've got this very pregnant mother, 3 little babies, and they're like, okay, let's GTFO. The fuck out of
even the Tower of London isn't a good place for us to hide.
Yeah, and then they go and they escape to Westminster Abbey, where they claim sanctuary.
Nathan, do you want to explain what sanctuary is real quick?
Yeah, okay. So back then, if you committed a crime or you were on the run from the law, or maybe you didn't commit a crime and they're accusing you of a crime and you're scared for your fucking life, you would run off to a church and then go into the church and claim sanctuary. Think Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Okay.
Sanctuary. So
Yes.
you're getting like protection from God,
Right.
basically.
God is your defense attorney.
Yes. And so it's a big no-no to try to be the prosecutor against God, who's your defense attorney.
Okay.
So anybody that tried to arrest you in sanctuary was like really frowned upon at that point.
Right. All right. So let's picture this through little baby Lizzie's eyes real quick. How traumatic would this shit be?
Right.
Escaping from like their palace in the middle of that. And they went from the Tower of London to Westminster Abbey in a boat. They had to be like super quiet because this is like in the middle of London. Like anybody could like look out and be like, is that the Queen on a boat with her children? You know, can you imagine trying to keep all these little kids quiet also on like this little bitty, on your little escape boat?
I already had problems with a 1-year-old at Christmas.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
3. No,
Right.
no, I'm done.
Yes. Like that just sounds like a lot to deal with. I mean, we do know that her entire life, Elizabeth of York was always very obedient to her parents. So maybe she was quiet, but she's also got this like 1-year-old sister who maybe doesn't understand what's happening. None of them
know what's happening.
I just imagine that this is a lot for her to unpack at therapy later.
Yeah, because I mean, imagine just like at 4 years old seeing like utter panic on your mother's face.
Right.
You know, like that can scar someone for life.
For life. So living in sanctuary. Was it cash money, Nathan?
Not super cash money.
Yeah.
You were living with like common criminals and maybe occasionally an innocent person here or there. But luckily for Elizabeth, the abbot of Westminster, Thomas Milliing, he took care of the royal family. So he really took them under his wing.
Westminster Abbey, like the people claiming sanctuary, basically just like slept in the pews, more or less. But when they were there, the abbot has a house like attached to like a lot of, I feel like that's pretty common still. A lot of times preachers of a church still have like house attached to the church or something.
Mhm.
And so he gave them a couple of rooms. As you would probably guess, the house attached to Westminster Abbey was nice. So they had a nice setup. Elizabeth Woodville had people bring them their clothes and their books and like stuff to write letters with. And they were still like able to send correspondence in and out. And they still were able to order like nice food and stuff like that. So while I still will say this is Elizabeth of York's major trauma number 2 in her life, things can and will get worse, fortunately.
No trauma. No trauma. I'm sorry. That's yeah. She was there from October 1st of 1470 until April 11th, 1471. So she would have celebrated her 5th birthday there. So I don't know if they actually celebrated amongst criminals.
But they were there for 6 months.
So basically, life in sanctuary is boring as hell.
Yes.
Just like quarantine.
Yes.
They couldn't really like go outside and be kids.
There's like no other kids. There's no toys. There's
just like imagine these 3 little girls living with no toys and no backyard. It must have been dull AF.
They didn't even have Nickelodeon, you know? No Disney Channel.
Like all you do is pray and read books.
And sit around waiting for somebody to come tell you your father is dead.
Yay! But one silver lining is that while there, Elizabeth Woodville gives birth to a baby boy.
Baby boy, you've been on my mind.
Fulfill my regency. That's all we need. So de facto, Lizzie wouldn't technically be the heir apparent anymore.
But you know what? Considering everything, I feel like that's at the bottom of her totem pole of worries.
Yeah.
Like, you're not heir anymore. Okay, can I go home? Can I go outside?
Right. Because, I mean, again, like being the heir, you have the potential in the War of the Roses to get your head lopped off tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, right. Oh. So baby boy is named Edward because of course he is. And he's christened while in sanctuary, which is probably the like most low-key christening of any of Edward IV's children. All the rest of them were like this big to-do. And
ironic.
And yeah, right. And baby boy just had to be kind of like quietly christened.
But praise baby Jeebus.
Mm-hmm.
Daddy ends up winning the ongoing battle in the War of the Roses, and he shows up, and the family's like, it's like this big happy reunion, and I'm pretty sure Elizabeth and him boned at that point. Elizabeth Woodville.
Oh. Thank you for the clarification.
Yes. I didn't think I had to clarify it, but luckily the next like 10 years of her life are very unimportant and uneventful. She like becomes the Dauphine of France. So she's engaged to the Dauphin of France.
Dauphin. Sorry.
Fucking basically the prince. Just call him a fucking prince.
Yeah.
But so she's like engaged to the prince. It was a really good match for Lizzie. Would eventually make her the queen of France. So I mean, basically a win-win. But
it would have been a really good match. The French court was like top of the top of fanciness. From then on, Lizzie's education and like everything surrounding her upbringing would have been geared towards you're going to be Queen of France. So we need your French to be spoken flawlessly. We need your gowns to be the most gorgeous gowns in all of the land.
You must learn how to dance and play music and sashay away.
Yes. Like after that, she would have like her just entire life would have revolved around you're going to be Queen of France one day. And I really do think that she ate it up. She was like obsessed with this purpose. And so she really fell in and she learned all these things perfectly and was jazzed. She was like, my parents want me to have this future. I need to make them proud.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she had a docera.
Yeah.
So a Spanish ambassador who visited her during childhood said that Elizabeth had all the great qualities of her father. So that's really good. She,
Right.
she just had that like knack of just naturally putting people at ease and, made conversation with her really easy. And she's like personable and likable. Yeah, she was also unusually tall for a girl at the time, which is cool. She's one of our models.
Her dad was 6'4" back when like the average height for a man was like 5'8".
Yeah, and she was really pretty too. So she, again, has all of these qualities to be the perfect princess.
She's got this stereotypical like English rose features. Light skin, light eyes, tall. Her hair was like somewhere between blonde and strawberry blonde.
So she also loved to read as well. So her dad made sure that she had a full library, which, oh my God, yes, queen. Edward IV seemed to really like Lizzie,
Yeah, that's sweet. But at the end of the day, I think that Lizzie felt loved.
Yeah, agreed.
I think she was like, oh my God, my dad loves me so much, and yay.
Yeah, so long story short, her engagement to the Dauphin, it fell through after like 5 years. The King of France and the King of England, they kept trying to like one-up each other in this like marriage contract. And eventually it all just...
The King of France at the time, Louis XI, he was actually known as the universal spider, and which doesn't sound super flattering. It's because he was always weaving webs. Like always starting shit, always like making alliances with somebody's enemy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, unsurprisingly, it turns out he had other alliances going on for his son. Once Edward caught wind of it, he was just like, we don't need him. We'll find you someone better, and cut ties.
Yeah, they did need him. So, yeah, there was nothing really to note for Lizzie's life in those few years. I mean, there was drama because...
Where are the roses?
The roses.
Yep.
And that's all its own soap opera. And, her father had one of his own brothers executed. Maybe by drowning him in a tub of wine, that whole thing.
Whole family. Normal family squabbles.
It could be considered, another one of those trauma. No trauma. That was trauma in her young life. But we really don't know how well informed she would have been about this at the time. So,
I mean, she would have had to been completely sheltered to not know that her uncle was being executed by her father. So, but I don't know. IDK.
So it's Christmas. It's Christmas, 1482. It's honestly, isn't this like one of the last times that they would actually have?
It is the last time that the entire York Woodville clan is together. Edward, the Prince of Wales, Edward had been sent off to Wales to be raised. He came in for Christmas. We've skipped over a little bit, and Elizabeth Woodville has had lots of other children, including another son named Richard. Richard had been like raised at court with like the younger sisters. So a lot less responsibilities and stuff. But an interesting side note that I found in my research is that Elizabeth of York seems to be the only one in the family that was close to every single one of the siblings.
Yeah, like a lot of the kids didn't know Prince Edward that well because he was kind of just raised nowhere near them. So naturally.
But but whenever Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville would go out on the like state events, they would bring their oldest daughter and the heir. And so the two of them got close in a way that no one else got close to Edward, who would be eventually Edward V. I thought that was kind of interesting.
So unfortunately, Lizzie's sister Mary dies, which would have been a really big blow to Lizzie. That was the sister that she lived with and she grew up with. So this would have been like one of those emotional gut punches that you have.
In April 1483, her life changes completely. Her dad, Edward IV, dies unexpectedly. Like he goes out hunting or fishing or something like that and catches a cold and dies. Everything from here on out in this story of Lizzie's life is turmoil.
Yeah, that's an understatement. So her 12-year-old brother is now king as Edward V, and his maternal uncle Anthony Woodville and his paternal uncle Richard Duke of Gloucester are appointed to help the young king rule because he's only fucking 12.
And as we've discussed many times in this show, when a king is a child, bad things happen.
Exactly. So not looking too hot right now. We're going to skim over this because it really doesn't involve Elizabeth of York. But basically, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, and Uncle Dick is what we're going to call him because it's just easy. Uncle Dick and the new young king have Elizabeth Woodville's brother arrested and executed. He also, Uncle Dick, has Lizzie's older half-brother executed. Elizabeth Woodville's first marriage dude named Richard Grey, right?
Edward V, he was raised by Anthony Woodville and his older half-brother. He didn't know Uncle Dick. He'd met Uncle Dick like at like official events and shit like that. So for Uncle Dick to just like roll in and have these people he'd known his whole life executed, that must have been a bit of a kerfuffle.
This is not good news.
Right. Lizzie's now like 17, so she definitely knows what's going on. And it's just like, oh, your uncle just killed your half-brother and your uncle and your other uncle.
Not good news.
What? And you think your family has drama? Like what?
This is fine. So Uncle Dick then takes the young king, Edward V, to the Tower of London for quote unquote safekeeping.
Super safe.
Until his coronation. So this was not something that was normally done. So it raised a couple of eyebrows, if you will. Elizabeth's mom uses her sixth sense, aka common sense.
Common sense.
And she's like, Molly, you in danger, girl. So she gets back to ye old Abbey, aka Westminster Abbey, and she claims sanctuary on April 31st, 1483.
Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Then the Calm Cove podcast can help you sleep deeply all night long. Calm Cove has deeply relaxing meditation music and ambient sounds like ocean waves and crackling fires. All of our episodes are designed to help you relax and to fall asleep fast. Calm Cove is brought to you by the team behind Sleep Cove, the sleep podcast that consists of spoken word hypnosis, meditation, and stories. So if you want to listen to a beautiful soundscape tonight, search for Calm Cove on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and see how we're helping millions of people relax and go to sleep every night.
So, poor baby Elizabeth is in church.
Again.
With criminals.
Again.
With people waiting to kill her father and entire family.
Again. Something that I would like to note between the last time they have been in Sanctuary and this time they're in Sanctuary, Edward IV, so Lizzie's dad, had actually in a battle broken Sanctuary. He was just like, fuck it. I'm getting those guys out and I'm killing them. And he wasn't actually there. So he sent his brother, Richard III, to go and like physically pull the guys out of Sanctuary. So Sanctuary was just a little bit not as respected as it had been like 10 or 11 years prior because of what her dad had done.
So needless to say, mom's getting the fuck out and they go back into Sanctuary and good old Uncle Dick ends up pressuring mom to send her baby boy, Richard, to quote unquote, keep her older son company in the Tower of London. Liza Minnelli, lies.
A lot of people say Elizabeth Woodville sent her son to go to the Tower of London into Richard III's care, so she must have not really suspected him of much. But also, They come in guns a-blazing. What are you supposed to do?
What choice did she have? She didn't have much of a choice.
She didn't have any choice, yeah.
So this stay, like we say in Sanctuary, this stay was different. They didn't get the nice clothes, the comforts, the nice room. Richard saw that they'd fled into Sanctuary, and he was like, good, why don't you stay there?
That seems like a great place for you.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he sent guards to Westminster to make sure that they didn't actually like flee or try to sneak out. They were there for a fucking year.
A year.
Can you imagine?
I mean, yes, because I've been in I've been in quarantine.
Sanctuary.
I've been in sanctuary. But
can we just call this Sanctuary?
I've been in quarantine since March, but at least I get to leave my house to like go on a jog.
Yeah. Pretty much life for Lizzie at this point isn't great. It's what we're getting at. No. She's back in Sanctuary. It's not fun. Mm-mm. And like the icing on the fucking cake, her uncle decides to declare that Elizabeth and her siblings are illegitimate. So Richard comes up with this story that Edward was married before to someone else, and he had consummated that marriage so that whenever he married Elizabeth Woodville in secret, that was bigamy. So he had two wives. So the children of the second wife, Elizabeth Woodville, were bastards.
To research for this episode, I read Alison Weir's book on Elizabeth York, and TLDR, this is bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a bullshit concept that basically put Richard III as the crowned king of England.
And he's like, who, me? Who? Me?
Oh, you like me. You really like me. It's like, no, we don't like you, asshole.
Elizabeth York, she's the Lady Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. Her mother is Dame Grey.
Ouch.
Because her first husband was a knight whose last name is Grey. Mm-hmm. And like the title for women married to knight is Dame. So you go from Queen of Elizabeth to Dame Grey, and it's like, whoo!
Yeah.
You were once the future Queen of France, and now you're Lady Elizabeth?
Not good news.
Doesn't gel with me.
Yeah, and basically what ends up happening is the two sons of Elizabeth Woodville, Edward V, who's the king technically, mm-hmm. and Richard, baby Richard, they ended up missing, but really we all kind of know that they were killed. They got killed.
After Richard made the proclamation that all of Edward's children with Elizabeth Woodville were now bastards, the princes in the Tower, Edward V and his brother Richard, were just seen less and less and less until they were not seen at all. And popular opinion is Richard had them killed. And honestly, popular opinion right now is probably still Richard had them killed, which we're not going to dive into our opinions here. Like we said, we're doing a whole other episode on Patreon.
Yeah. But Edward IV was a pretty popular king, and a lot of people in England believe that their current king had two of Edward's kids killed in cold blood. So they believed that Richard III killed their favorite king's sons. So to say that Richard had a complicated relationship with his people would be quite the understatement.
Right. He was popular in the north because before the princes died, that's like where he ruled as Duke in the north. But everybody in the south was a little bit like, I don't know her. You know what I mean? Like
I think that was a direct quote.
I don't know her.
I do have to wonder, like, remember how before her brother was born, Edward named him his heir? Right. Well, now, like, with her brothers gone, she would technically be Edward's heir. I mean, I am just Queen Elizabeth I right now, and for her to be Queen Elizabeth
or more, are you scared that you're going to be the next one to get killed?
That too, because the other two are MIA. Whoop!
You're the next heir. Go. Are you going to get killed? It sounds like a scary existence to me.
Right. Okay, so we're going to introduce some new people into this equation because why not? And their names are not Richard Edward or Elizabeth.
Thank God.
We've got Margaret Beaufort and her son, Henry Tudor. Maybe you've heard of him.
Maggie B had a claim to the throne through her dad's line. So her son, Henry Tudor, is living in exile in Brittany, which is modern day France.
Yeah, and he's been there for like ever, right?
Yeah, he was like kind of afraid that if he came back, people might try to kill him.
Which, I mean, not a bad assumption.
I mean, we did maybe just see the murder of a 12 and 9-year-old. So
yeah. But Margaret Beaufort and Elizabeth Woodville would have known each other for decades, but would have never been friends, if you will. Yeah, except in this case, we need to change that. Yeah, so Maggie B sends her doctor to Sanctuary, where Elizabeth Woodville is. And the doctors were like the only people that Uncle Dick's guards would let in to see the royal family in Sanctuary. And the doctor's like, look, girl, I'm sorry, Miss Woodville. Your sons they be dead. And I wish I had better news.
Better news.
So Lizzie York, again, witnesses her mother have a complete mental breakdown.
Oh my God. In the Alison Weir book, she talks about how just Lizzie, like it made the doctor uncomfortable. Just like how bad Elizabeth Woodville was just like losing her shit. But I mean, duh.
Can you fucking blame her? She's lost like 3 sons, a brother, a husband, her titles, her freedom, just about every fucking thing she has.
Right. So Elizabeth Woodville is like losing her shit. And then, of course, Elizabeth York is going to be, like, affected by that.
Mm-hmm. She's not 5 years old this time. She's a grown adult at this point.
I mean, I don't know if I would have considered myself a grown adult at 17.
But in terms of her, like, being a princess,
yeah.
like, yeah, she would be considered an adult.
That, I feel like from now on, Elizabeth of York has this sense of, I need to do what it takes to survive.
Yeah, and at this point, she knows that Margaret Beaufort, Maggie B, is what she has her lifeline.
Right.
So she's like, you know what? Whatever plot you're cooking, I am down with that.
Let's hear about it. What you talking about? What you want to do?
The doctor's like, well, Margaret Beaufort has a son. And you have a daughter, so if they get married, you see where I'm going with this? Yes.
Putting the
War of the Roses.
Putting the red rose into the light rose to make the Tudor rose.
Oh, so once again, Lizzie is engaged. She's never really met Henry Tudor because he's been in exile like his entire life.
Yeah.
And we have really no evidence of how she felt about this. But what we do know is that she's going to be loyal to her mom's decision and whatever's going to benefit her siblings.
Right. So if her mom was like, hey, I want you to marry this guy you don't know, she's going to be like, yes, ma'am. Also, because what other prospects does she have? She's in Sanctuary. So she wouldn't have been completely ignorant to who Henry Tudor is. He's a few years older than Lizzie, and he's been in exile damn near his entire life because he's the only surviving Lancastrian heir. Earlier in Lizzie's life, her dad, King Edward, was like, hey, I just really want to like wrap up this Wars of the Roses. So come back to England from your exile in France and I'll marry you to one of my daughters. He likely didn't mean Lizzie because she was like the big cat. She likely meant one of his younger daughters. So still, that means that the family knew. It's not like Henry Tudor was this like
unknown person
you've never heard of. Yeah, it was somebody they at least knew existed and had titles and shit. So
guess who gets wind of this plot? Uncle Dick.
Fucking Uncle Dick.
And he's like, having my nieces locked up in sanctuary might not be a good PR move for me. Mm-mm. So let's rebrand ourselves.
It was very bad for his brand.
So Uncle Dick makes this big public statement, and he's like, you know, you can find the full text online and feel free to look it up. But the gist of it is, OMG, Elizabeth Woodville, please come in our sanctuary. I feel so bad. If you do, I promise you and your daughters will be super safe with me. I'll arrange good marriages. We'll provide a dowry, all the good shit.
Just OMG, please stop with the sanctuary bullshit. And so they do. They do. They leave sanctuary. Some people cite this as proof. If she actually thought that
her sons,
if she actually thought that Richard III had killed her sons, why would she send her daughters into their court? But also, it's like, what else was their future? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, she's basically making this decision under duress.
You're right.
If you will. I mean, she doesn't have.
They're surrounded by like forces hanging out their door. They got soldiers and like people on the Thames River, like with making sure, like watching them. What other exit plan does she have?
Yeah, so they end up moving out and they go live in a minor royal household. And the daughters are then required to attend all the major events, you know, like Easter, Christmas, just to make sure that this family portrait is fine. We're all happy.
People see them all together on the big events. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think Lizzie felt about this?
Honestly, on one hand, she's like this beautiful princess. She's social. So she obviously wants to get out, go dancing, go flirt with boys, be, you know, your typical 18-year-old. Mm-hmm. And, you know, she's growing up, she's been used to living in the public eye, and being in this dark and gloomy church kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But also, her uncle ruined her entire fucking life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many relatives are dead because of him? And so,
lots.
You know, like, yeah, lots. So when she goes to court, she's no longer this Princess Elizabeth, but she's a lady. So she's obviously has a bitter taste in her mouth.
Right.
It's bittersweet, I would say.
It also may have been like this crazy amount of pressure to like appear at court, but also show this like deference to this new king. Because if she doesn't, people might spark an uprising in her name. And I don't think she wants that. I don't think she wants.
She's also got like a secret engagement with a rival king.
Yeah.
So that's scandalous in itself.
So I feel like when she comes back to court, she is walking the most tricky tightrope.
And she's tipping on the tightrope.
All eyes are on her.
So there was a scandal that following Christmas. Uncle Dick's Queen Anne, she's dying, and they didn't have like any close living children. And Lizzie shows up for court duties, and she's given this beautiful gown that she's supposed to wear on Christmas Day. And then Christmas Day comes around, and she and the Queen were actually wearing the exact same dress.
Scandal.
Do you remember in like, I think it was like I want to say it was like our junior year or something. It was like 3 or 4 girls
wore the same dress to prom,
black and white dress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was totally that. It was a fucking scandal. They went back to JCPenney and were like, I want my money back.
Yes. This was a bit of a bigger deal.
Yeah.
Because it was like, tongues are wagging.
This bastard, this quote unquote bastard child is wearing the same dress as the queen who's dying. And that is not a good look.
It makes me feel bad for Queen Anne because she's a bit older
totally.
And she's like on death's door. And so that's inviting these comparisons of these two women that are dressed in the same dress. One, which is 18 and like in the prime of her life, and the other, which is like this dying woman. It's like, she didn't ask for that comparison.
And I don't think Lizzie asked for it either.
Oh no,
she didn't.
She didn't come up to court and be like, "Bring me the same dress the queen is wearing." No,
it's almost certain that Uncle Dick dressed them alike to show that the court, how well that he was treating this old daughter of the king. He's treating him like his wife. It's like, but no.
He's like, LOL, I super promise not to kill this one.
Exactly.
But it was this huge national scandal.
Yeah, it was like all these rumors got started that Richard planned to marry Lizzie himself once Anne died. To this day, it's still debated.
It's a huge debate still. Did Richard actually plan to marry his niece, or was he just trying to set her up looking pretty in the court? What do you think, Nathan? Do you think he was trying to marry his niece?
I think it's very Agrippina the younger of him to try to marry the fucking niece.
Yeah.
I personally don't think that he did, but I mean, it's Richard it's Uncle Dick. I wouldn't put it past him.
On one hand, I have ew. Ew.
Yeah, very ew.
Though it wasn't completely unheard of the time. Do you remember in the Isabella Castile episode, she had that bastard half-sister? Married the King of Portugal. They were
Alfonso.
Yeah. So they were niece and uncle. So it wasn't completely unheard of, though I did go through a complete list of monarchs from England. And I don't think this was ever a done thing in England. It was, It was very ew. And everybody at the court said ew, and nobody wanted it. But I don't think Richard did anything to combat the rumors because he knew about the secret engagement between Elizabeth of York and Henry Tudor, and he wanted to intimidate his forces. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
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 But also, ew.
Yeah. Ew.
Ew.
But regardless if he was actually floating this idea, it was shot down immediately in popular opinion and by his counsel. So around this time, there's a letter from Lizzie that survives to her uncle, which she calls him, quote unquote, my only joy and maker. And it's also this letter also has some romantic language in it. And like we said, that's just kind of the way people talk that day in letters.
Yeah.
But some people claim that based on this, she is saying that she would be happy to marry him. But I don't agree.
I mean, we have no idea what was going in her head right now. She could have had a million things going in her head right now. I think she was living a very scary life right now. Mm-hmm. If she would have actually come to her senses and was telling her truth, I don't think she was writing saying my only joy and maker to her uncle because she wanted to marry him. I think he was her maker. Her destiny was in his hands. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so she's just kind of buttering him up, if you will, just being nice. That's what
she's already had. One sister, her sister Cecily, who's been married off to literally some nobody. So if she's not buttering him up, maybe he's going to marry her off to some nobody. And I think, honestly, she'd rather marry him and be Queen of England than...
Yeah.
Because what is she supposed to be like? Dear Uncle Dick, fucketh you?
Yeah, I think that would go over real well.
Right?
So after Queen Anne died in March of 1485, Richard decides to send Lizzie away to stop all this gossip. So, side note, when Queen Anne died, there was this full solar eclipse. So you bet your fucking ass all the superstitious people were like, okay, this is a bad omen.
I am not one of those people that completely consign to this image of Shakespeare's Richard III, where he is just this diabolical villain. I think he was a complicated person, just like any other person in history. But if you were living back in the time when people did not understand science and someone that you thought might be evil, his wife dies, and the sun is covered by the moon.
Not
Wouldn't you
good.
also be like,
Yeah. So they get the beautiful Lizzie out of the fucking town, and she goes to a palace out in the country called Sheriff Hutton, where some of her York cousins are living, including the future Margaret Pole, which we're obviously going to cover one day in her own episode. One of those cousins was her cousin Edward, the 9-year-old Earl of Warwick, who
poor baby Edward.
Poor baby Edward.
We'll talk about him more next episode. Yeah.
And Richard gets to negotiating a marriage for her at this time, Lizzie, because his and her reputation would be better once it's arranged.
The negotiation was that Richard was going to marry one of the princesses of Portugal, and Lizzie was going to marry a very minor prince of Portugal. But because like all these people in the Portuguese family die, that guy ends up becoming king. So I'm actually happy she didn't end up marrying him. Spoiler alert. Because like, since she was technically a bastard, I wonder if things had gone completely differently, if she would have ended up being put aside when he became king.
But guess what? It doesn't matter. Because those negotiations go down the fucking toilet.
Yeah.
Because remember that dude named Henry Tudor that we mentioned earlier?
Sounds familiar.
Henry Tudor and his army have entered the chat. And by that, I mean England.
That was cute.
So in August that year, Henry Tudor, her secret fiance that she's never met, by the way, he lands in England, and Elizabeth knows there's going to be battles, and she knows that the outcome of this could completely fucking change her life. So in a time when news travels very, very slowly, I have to imagine that this must have been like torturous for her.
Yeah, I feel like everybody listening has probably had times when they're biting their nails, waiting for an email to come through. Can you imagine biting your nails, waiting for a fucking carrier pigeon?
Yeah, right? Because it's like, if one side wins, you're the fucking Queen of England, and you make your mother happy, and it's all good news. You like can make sure your sisters are taken care of.
Right.
You can make sure your family is where they are. But if the other side wins, you move to Portugal and you never see your fucking family again. So we know how Lizzie would have felt. She would have wanted to see her.
We have to assume, again, this is all under the assumption that she believed that her uncle killed her brothers and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But I happen to believe that she was rooting for Henry Tudor. What do you think, Nathan?
Oh, yeah.
You think so too?
I think she's absolutely rooting for Henry Tudor instead of marrying her uncle. Not marrying her uncle, but going to Portugal because of the behest of her evil uncle. No, I don't think she wanted any part of that Portugal plan.
Totally. So about a week later, the battle comes to a head. It's called the Battle of Bosworth. We're not going to dive into it because Lizzie wasn't there. However, I am not even like someone that finds like history of wars and battles very interesting. But the Battle of Bosworth is kind of interesting. So if you want to dive into it, there's plenty of war podcasts where you can find that information. The Cliff Notes is Richard becomes the last English king to die on the battlefield.
Yes.
Do you know this line? A horse, a kingdom for my horse.
Might that be William Shakespeare?
It absolutely is, because it means that the story goes Richard III was unhorsed, thus the horse that he is looking for. And then he was stabbed and his crown rolls off and it like basically rolls into a bush right by Henry Tudor, who then just puts it on like, doop, this is how this works.
It's mine now, bitch.
Yes, exactly. And then Henry Tudor becomes the last king of England to become king by conquest. So this...
Yeah, and thank God, this is where the Thank God it's over.
It's over. It's over.
Yeah, because basically everyone else that's a major player has been killed. So there's really no other choice to go.
Except for the 9-year-old Earl of Warwick, which sadly we'll get to next time.
Yeah, so it's the end of the Plantagenet dynasty in England, which lasted a whopping 330 years.
That is a very long dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
The moment the battle was over, literally, Henry Tudor sends 2 of his dudes to Sheriff Hutton. He's like, you need to go get that princess, bring her here ASAP. And so they roll up the next day. It was a 2-day journey. They come up the next day. So they're like riding like hell. They roll up and they're like, hey, your uncle's dead. Pack your bags. You need to go meet your fiance. And according to the contemporary sources, she was like, fuck yeah.
The direct quote. I mean, it was the best of her 2 options.
Right. So that's when we leave her. So we'll see y'all in a couple of weeks, guys.
Cheers, bitches.
Cheers, bitches.
Hello everyone, Stakuyi here.
And I'm Gabby.
And we are the hosts of History of Everything, a podcast which you can probably guess by the name is, well, I mean, it's about everything. Do you want to know why people thought potatoes were evil and would give you syphilis? Are you curious about all the stories of the terrible and stupid ways that people have kicked the bucket over the years? Do you want to hear tales about all of the different badasses of history and the lives that they had brought to life? Well, if so, then look no further. History of Everything is just the right podcast for you. It's available on Spotify, Pandora, and anywhere else that you get your podcast from. Join us for some fun and just see how weird and wacky history can be.